Hi, folks. Welcome to the first episode of The Beginner's Mind by That Fig Tree. That Fig Tree is a marketing insight and analytics company based in Singapore. Mission of this show is to simplify consumer marketing and leadership stories. Behavioral science. We all know what a fabulous, fantastic, fascinating discipline it is, but how marketers can use it in their decision making. We talked to Nancy Harhut. She is a well-accomplished author and an award-winning marketing consultant. She has recently written a book on using behavioral science in marketing. The book is getting great reviews. I hope you enjoy the conversation. And for such meaningful discussions, please do follow the channel. All right, Nancy, here we go. Thank you so much, Nancy, for giving us time. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and your book is doing rounds everywhere. I mean, I log into LinkedIn, it's your book. I looked at Amazon, the reviews are so amazing. I'm so glad to read them. Look, I mean, all 5-star rating, and people are loving this book, and I've seen some of the feedback. Now, people are talking about chat GPTs, AI, all the fancy stuff. And you went ahead and wrote a book on behavioral science. Why did you do that? What happened?
So, well, first, thank you for your kind words about my book. I appreciate that. I'm very happy it's doing well too. So how did I come to write it? That's a good question. The short answer is Kogan Page, the London-based publisher, reached out to me and asked if I would like to write a book. I was like, wow. I hadn't really thought about writing a book, but now that you mention it, that sounds like a good idea. So I put together a proposal, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought this would be a really good idea. And here's the reason why. I'm a big believer in using behavioral science in marketing. I started to experiment with it. I started to see that it was working, and I started to use it for my clients, and they started to see that it was working. And so I thought this is a great way to bring that information to a lot of other people who do marketing, because I have a small agency. I can take on only a certain number of clients. I speak at industry conferences, but there are only so many of those. And this would be a way to get the word out to way more people than certainly working with them or speaking to them would allow me to do. So it was my enthusiasm for the subject and my belief in the subject that really propelled me to put together what I've learned and share it with everyone. So that's the kind of the longer answer as to why I wrote the book.
No, it's a good answer. Now, let me question your belief on behavioral science. I mean, look, we bit of background and research, and we've been working with clients as well. Clients don't tend to believe behavioral science so much. I mean, it sounds a bit, you know, hairy fairy, not actionable to them. What do you say to that?
So, what's worked for me is probably a combination of three things. It's funny you say behavioral science can sound kind of hairy-fairy, but when an agency creative person stands up to present, that also can sound a little hairy-fairy, because the business person, the client, is sitting there thinking, all right, why is the agency showing me this? Do they think that it's fun and cool and going to win awards? Did the art director do something because the art director would really rather be painting pictures that would hang in a museum? Did the writer write it this way because the writer really would rather write a fiction bestseller? They're a little skeptical of the agency and the agency creative. So I find that when I present to clients, three things happen. One, I will point to a study that was done at Harvard or Yale or Stanford that explains the behavioral science that we're using, so that they know that it's not just me or just the agency that thinks this is good. I've done it this way for this reason. I've written it this way. I've chosen this look based on these scientific studies. So that helps. But then, it's like, well, all right, science, some people's eyes just roll back in their head. It seems too complicated. They're marketing people. What is this science thing? So then what I try to do is I try to talk about the behavioral science principle in everyday terms. So, if I was describing social proof, for example, that's an easy one. But if I was describing social proof, the idea that people will make decisions based on looking around and seeing what other people like them have done. I can talk about McDonald's and say, you look at the golden arches, and right under it, it says billions and billions served. That's an example of social proof. Or I can talk about maybe something that happened to me. I wasn't interested in buying a particular pair of shoes, but then everyone I saw had those shoes, and suddenly I had to have those shoes. So I talk about the academic study and why it's scientifically proven, and then maybe I'll take the same principle and apply it in, everyday life, so that the client goes, oh, I get it. And then the third thing that I'll do is, if I've already used this technique, or I know somebody in marketing who has, I'll mention it and say, this technique was used by such and such a company, or we use this for one of our clients, and these are the results that we saw. And those three things usually help get clients on board and feeling that this is a good thing. Every time I talk about behavioral science, people will come to me and ask about whether or not they can work with me. When they do come to the agency, they specifically want behavioral science. They're coming for that very reason. So we're finding it's actually a competitive advantage for us. But in terms of convincing the people who are a little skeptical, those are the three ways that I do it. I point to the academic studies, I talk about the in-market success, and then I make it easy and accessible by using a everyday example of how the principle works. And very often someone will say, oh my gosh, you're right, I've done that too. And that's when they realize, ooh, this stuff really does work.
I think this is really good, and obviously it's a bit of learning for us as well. I think how do we talk about it? Now, I looked at your website, your company, and you talked about ROI, return on investment, through behavioral science. Am I correct? I think I saw the
I'm sorry,
ROI.
we talked about what with behavioral science?
ROI, return on investment. Return
Oh,
on
ROI, yes,
investment.
yes.
Now, so ROI is basically the terms, associated with modelings. You do how much you spend on marketing and, you know, Y amount of impact. So how do you kind of end up measuring ROI, or how do you kind of talking about ROI with behavioral science? Because it's not pure numbers, right?
Well, sometimes it's numbers. Sometimes it's actually a client will look at the money they spent on the campaign that we created using behavioral science, and look at the return that they got on it, and that's a pretty simple, straightforward uh, comparison. Sometimes we'll talk to clients, and they'll tell us about the lift in response they got, and maybe that response was generating leads, or maybe it was selling right off the page. So I can give you a couple of examples. We did a campaign for a financial services firm, and they sold retirement planning, and they sold it through various financial advisors who were independent. And what they found was, over time, some of these independent financial advisors had stopped selling their funds. And so they had tried to reach out to them, call them, contact them, email them. The wholesaler would try to get in touch with them to try to reactivate them, to try to find out what was going on. And they'd had very little success. So they came to us with this list of financial advisors that they said, these people used to sell our product, but over a year ago they stopped, and we've been very unsuccessful at getting them to reengage. What can you do? We'd like you to send something to them to try to reengage them. And in the financial services field, it's not uncommon to send gifts to financial advisors, a sleeve of golf balls, or a logo hat or T-shirt, right? Eh, you know, same old, same old. And so we said, all right, we're going to take a different approach. And we ended up sending them an email, first of all, that said, watch your mail, because we've chosen a gift especially for you. And then a few days later, in the postal mail, a white corrugated cardboard box arrived, and inside the box was a framed New Yorker cartoon. And the New Yorker cartoon was some little kid running around the neighborhood, dressed up like a insurance salesman selling insurance, and it was funny. It made you smile. And the caption in the cartoon had the recipient's name in it. So not only was it a New Yorker cartoon, but the actual caption of the cartoon made you smile, but you saw your own name. So we sent this out. People received it. There was also a letter that went with it, very short letter from the wholesaler that said, we've been trying to get in touch. Please give me a call. We'd just like to catch up. If I don't hear from you, I'll be ringing you shortly. And then they followed up with a couple of emails with just some helpful information about, selling certain funds that they had. And the client, not us, but the client, reported back to us that they attributed $68 million of incremental revenue to this particular
Wow.
campaign. Had they not sent it out and reactivated these financial advisors, that would have been money that they just didn't capture. So that was, I think, a really good example of being able to measure ROI. In other cases, we were working with one client that sold insurance, and they were trying to get their customers to buy more insurance. And often what happens when you buy insurance is you check it off your list and you just don't ever want to go back to it, right? It's a difficult thing. It's just something
Pain.
you don't want to think about.
Mm.
And so we redid their direct mail piece to infuse it with behavioral science. And one of the things that we did that was really critical is we put in a chart, or a graph, I should say. And at one end of the graph was $0. That was the least insurance you could possibly have. And at the other end was 3 million. That was the most this particular company sold. And then we showed the recipient where they were on the chart, and it was always left of center. So if they sold up to $3 million of insurance, we only sent this message to people who had less than 1.5 million. They were going to always be left of center. And we did this because we wanted to trigger something that Dr. Robert Cialdini refers to as the pull of the magnetic middle. And it's this idea that for the most part, people don't like to be lagging behind, nor do they like to be out on the bleeding edge. They feel more safe, more comfortable somewhere in the middle. So by showing people where they were, at a glance, they would realize that they were a little lagging behind. They weren't in that safe middle spot because they were left of center. And we didn't expect that they would all rush over and increase their insurance so that they're at the full 3 million mark. But we did hope, our hypothesis was that they would move closer to the center, and they did. We saw a 459% increase over the control, and in this case, that increase was measured in sales because this was a sell off the page kind of insurance product. So it's ways like that that we quantify the success of these efforts and point to the fact that it would be money well invested for clients to begin to embrace behavioral science and infuse it in their marketing communications.
It sounds pretty neat to me because I think this is important. A lot of analytics work. It's easier. ROI kind of gets a little bit easier to measure, but I think these are very good uh, pointers towards how can one make behavioral science more relevant and appealing to clients. Now, Nancy, two examples you've given me, and both are financial industry. Now, that brings my question to you is that, can it be applied equally to all industry? Is it industry agnostic? Or a certain industry has more, application for this?
That's a really good question, and I will say that we do attract a lot of financial services and insurance clients, and it's you know probably because you work with one and they refer someone else to you, and then someone else sees your work, and so they come to you. So it's not that it was a deliberate effort on our part, but we do have a lot of financial services and insurance clients. However, we also have worked with clients in the education space, in the not-for-profit space, in the pharmaceutical space, in the healthcare space, in the telecom and cable space. So, from my perspective, I see behavioral science being applicable across a wide number of industries. It may not always be the same principles that we're using, it may be slightly different applications, uh, but from the experience that I have, I see it being applicable in many different industries. And then I look at the various companies that we read about that have embraced behavioral science. Either they have a chief behavioral science officer or a very
Mm.
senior level behavioral science person, in their ranks. And I look at companies like Netflix or Google or Uber or Blue Cross Blue Shield or Manulife, which is financial services, but Walmart. So that is a pretty wide range there. So I think that it's applicable, or at least largely applicable, across a wide range of industries.
So it's mostly what I'm hearing from you. It's a lot about job to be done. It's a lot about the objective rather than the industry. As long as so.
That's a really good way of putting it. It's really about behavioral change. If you think about the study of human behavior at its basic level, it's the study of why people do what they do, and maybe how we can influence them to do more of what we'd like them to do. And if you think about marketing, in marketing, that's our big job. We're trying to convince people to try or buy again, or offer up some data, to click, to call, to visit. We're trying to influence behavior, trying to change behavior. And so if behavioral science is all about why people do what they do, and maybe the decision making shortcuts that they rely on, or the decision defaults that they use, that gives us as marketers a great opportunity to start to embed some of the triggers that would prompt those decision-making shortcuts into our communications in order to increase the likelihood we get the behavior we're looking for. And as
Totally.
you say, yes, that depends. That would be, regardless of what particular industry we're in,
Yeah,
whether we want people to save more for retirement or buy more at the local department store.
yeah, I would guess. Now, I'm not sure whether you were able to read that article which I sent you, The Death of Behavioral Science.
I did.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are a lot of things will go around, even against AI or even against ChatGPT. Anything has a rebuttal, right? I mean, it's the death of behavioral science at one end looks like a bit of an extreme, but at the other side, on the other side, we can see that the client should be using it or company should be using it a little bit more than what they're using it at the moment. But going to another extreme of death of behavioral science, you have a view on that, or you know, uh,
I do. When you sent me the article, I was surprised because you said, "Oh, I've been reading about the death of behavioral scientists." Oh, I hadn't seen that. I hadn't been reading that, but I did read it, and so this is this is just my thought, only me. But I've been in marketing for a while, and of course, I read about the death of direct mail. But direct mail is alive and well, and it's actually experiencing a resurgence. And then some time passed, and I was reading a lot about the death of email. But email just doesn't want to die. It's the channel that people can't quit.
it's
We continue
evolved.
to rely on it, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're reading about the death of behavioral science, and I think to your point, there's always going to be somebody who takes a contrarian view. It's good to attract attention to themselves. It's good to get people to think about things a little bit more differently, a little bit more critically, and I think that there are probably some points that are worth considering. I believe that, and I say this in my book, there's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet. It's not like we can just say, "Oh, we have behavioral science now. Now I can make people do things," and that's not the case. Nor should a marketer want to make people do things they don't want to do. That's not really the job of marketers. We want to get people who could benefit from our products and services to experience them, but we don't want to force people into anything. And so anyone who thinks at a very high level that, oh, I'm just going to grab some behavioral science off the shelf and I'm going to use it, and it's going to be like waving that magic wand and everything is going to work for me, I'm going to get all these customers, that's a problem. And this idea that one size fits all is also a problem. So if people are thinking of behavioral science in that way, then that's not going to work for them, and it will die. But when you look at some of the successes that we've had, and I mentioned two right there that I'm familiar with because we worked on those. Those are quite good. Now, not all of my clients experience that. Some of them have maybe a 5% increase or a 3% increase. But if it's easy enough to get that 3% using behavioral science, and
Why
it's a
not?
lot harder to get it elsewhere in
Yeah.
another way, let's happily take that 3% or that 5%. So I don't see it disappearing anytime soon. I see behavioral science becoming stronger and stronger. And we talked about just some of the companies that are embracing it. I think we're going to see even more of that. You'd mentioned AI earlier. I think the combination of artificial intelligence and behavioral science together are going to provide, or is going to provide, more opportunities for marketers, just in terms of being able to process data quicker and help us more specifically pinpoint which message to which segment at which time. So I don't see it dying. That's my personal opinion.
No, I think, look, yeah, I think it's a very good answer the way you put it. It's complementary to whatever is there, AI plus behavioral science. I mean, it's not either or, it's I think everything going in together, more of a 360 view, which is good. Now, another question which I had is that you talked about various principles in the book, right? A lot of behavioral science principles in the book, and you went into detail. Uh, Explaining them with examples, and which was amazing. Now, which is most used principle you see? I mean, social proofing, is it? Because I mean, that's what I easily understand too. I mean, as I said, I'm not an expert on behavioral science, so
Yeah, I think there's a lot of social proof. I think that's one of the ones that people are most familiar with. I believe it's very effective, but also perhaps because it's so effective, we see a lot of it. I think the other thing that we see a lot of is scarcity. you're booking a flight or you're booking a hotel room, and they'll say, oh, there's only 3 left at this price, or there's only 2 available. So we see a lot of that. But again, we know that works. People don't want to miss out. So if there's only a few available, that makes us more likely to make a decision now. So I see those two used fairly frequently, but there are others that are, I think, maybe underused
Yeah.
for at least for marketing
Like,
purposes. Um, well, autonomy bias, I think, is a good example. This idea that humans have this deep-seated desire to exert some kind of control over ourselves and our environment. We want some kind of agency. We don't like to be forced. So a great way to trigger or to activate autonomy bias is to give somebody a choice. And a lot of times in marketing, we kind of put that one thing in front of people and we say, this is what we want you to buy. And it actually has been shown that if you put 2 options in front of someone, they're much more likely to make a buying decision in the moment. If you put that one thing in front of them, there's nothing to compare it to, there's no context. They think, oh, I'll do some research, I'll ask around, and they get busy. They don't end up doing the research and don't end up making the buying decision. But when you have 2 options in front of people, they go from do I or do I not want this to, oh, which of these 2 do I want? And they're much more likely to make that decision and make a purchase. So I think that's a really valuable technique that marketers can use that's perhaps underused. Another one might be the idea of rhyme is reason bias, that rhyming phrases are not only easier to
yeah,
remember,
yeah, yeah.
but they've been shown to be more believable. People think they're more accurate, more truthful. So, there was a time when a lot of companies had rhyming taglines. You don't see that as often, but it's not just taglines. We can use, rhyming phrases in our content titles, in our subject lines for our emails, and our headlines for our ads, in our slogans, of course, and our campaign lines, our strap lines. But it's a great opportunity to not only make something more memorable, but also make it more believable. So I think there are, in my book, I talk about, I think, over 25 different behavioral science principles, and some of them are better known and maybe more often used. Not necessarily That's not necessarily a bad thing because they work, but social proof, scarcity, we see a lot more of that. But then there are some others that I think could be used even more, like rhyme is reason bias, like autonomy bias.
Yeah. Look, I have a very side question on this, and this is my personal experience on social proofing, if I'm understanding it correctly. I'm not sure whether all the time it's used ethically. Uh, I mean, ethically in the sense that, we have this thing. I think we're trying to create comparisons, benchmarks, and the other side we talk about, you just compare you to yourself and not to others. But I think social proofing to a certain extent is misutilized to create some kind of negative emotions, I would say. Or for example, and when I was growing up in India, there was, and I won't name the brand, they talked about one particular cream which will make you white. I know if you're dark, it kind of whitens your skin. Now that kind of thing is not good for self-esteem for people who have darker skin. And it's sold like crazy, right? One of the best-selling brands. So I think that there are. Do you see that happening, or what's your take on that?
So I think you raise a very good point. This idea of marketers using these principles ethically and responsibly. And I think that that's something we absolutely need to do. And not every marketer does, just like not every marketer, um, follows all the best practices, with email marketing, for example. Some of them spam, or with direct mail. Some, they just put it all out there without proper targeting. So not every marketer is responsible and ethical and treats their customers with respect. But the best marketers, the good marketers, they do in fact do that. And I always, when I talk about using behavioral science principles, say to people, and I wrote about it in the book too, you want to use these responsibly, you want to use these ethically, because if you don't, even if you get that short-term win, that short-term sale, in the long run, it can erode brand trust, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Uh, and that can be a very hard thing to recover from. Once you've lost that trust, you may never be able to rebuild it. So I think using these ethically, using these responsibly, is really the guideline that I would offer to marketers. It's certainly the way that we do it with our clients.
Yeah, nice. Now, look, one question again, I think if you look at a lot of these big companies right now, you have a Nielsen of the world, you have Kantars of the world. They're all kind of a companies that started from West, right? And a lot of research has happened in West, you know. So sometimes these questions which cross our minds is that all these biases, all these principles, are they culture agnostic, or they are, are they as applicable to India or China as to US or UK, you know? Have you thought about that?
That's a good question, and I know that I mean I'm not out there. I'm not an academic or a researcher.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm a marketer. I'm a marketer who applies behavioral science. I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I've read. I read a lot about it actually, and I have read that there is an allegation that too much of the research is what they call weird, which is white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic nations, so
Mm.
it's not necessarily representative. But then I do also read pockets of research that say, a lot of these are really deep-seated human behavior triggers that, you know, have been with us over the ages. And we've kind of, as humans have evolved, some of these very deep-seated behavior patterns have stayed with us. And they started way back in the early days of humankind when we were just trying to survive from one day to the next. And then, the certain genes of those that survived, they passed those genes on from generation to generation. So some of this is very deep-seated and very hardwired. That said, I've also seen that there are cultural differences, and sometimes even mindset differences. So what plays well in a more Western competitive country may not play as well, or perform, I should say, as well in a Eastern, more collective,
Society.
community-oriented
Yeah.
country. I've seen differences in reported in gender. Men may respond better to. I saw one study that said men respond better to sales prices in red. For women, sales price could be in red or in black, didn't really make a difference. Men can be more interested in comparing themselves to other men. Women can be more interested in inclusion in community. So there are gender differences. There are sometimes age differences. The older we get, the less susceptible we are to the idea of loss aversion. I've seen studies that show that. So there are, I think, going to be cultural differences, gender differences, age differences. But when I speak, I quote studies from a number of different countries. If I'm talking about mirror neurons, I'll talk about the University of Parma study. If I'm talking about using equations in marketing, because equations can provide that instant credibility, even if people don't understand them. That came from a study out of Stockholm. Um, there was a study on the motivating uncertainty effect that came out of Chinese University in Hong Kong. So I do try to pull pieces of research from outside of the US, as I'm talking about this at various marketing conferences, and certainly in my book, I've quoted all of those as well, just to provide a little bit more of a wider view, a more inclusive view.
Yeah. No, okay. I appreciate that answer. I think I just want a couple of more questions. Let me get a bit futuristic, as a practitioner, as a speaker at various conferences, veteran marketer. How do you see the field evolving? I mean, do you have any view, let's say, I mean, being a quant researcher, I mean, I can think about, how possibly the AI could evolve. There is ChatGPT 4, 5, and how things will change. Now, in this field, how do you think the evolution is likely to happen?
Well, I think for one, I think more and more companies are becoming aware of it and starting to embrace it. So I think we're going to just see more behavioral science infused into marketing messages, which will make them more effective and more efficient. So I think that's a good thing. On the other hand, I think it's going to get more competitive because of that. Right now it's a competitive advantage if you're using behavioral science to craft your marketing messages. And if your competition's not, that gives you a leg up. If more and more of your competitors start to do it, it starts to level the playing field, not unlike AI for that matter. So I think we're going to see more and more companies using it, but then it's going to bring the playing field up, and it's going to be a little bit more competitive, or a lot more competitive. I think that as we said earlier, that marriage of AI and behavioral science is going to like turbocharge things, because suddenly we'll be able to crunch data much faster. We'll be able to identify uh, who we should talk to, where we can find them, what we should say to them much more quickly than we can now. And then the behavioral science comes in and tells us, all right, how do we serve up that message? Now that I know who I want to talk to, where I can find them, what I want to say to them that will be most motivating, then the behavioral science will come along and allow me to say it in the way that's going to resonate best, more likely to be noticed, more likely to be read, understood, and acted upon. So that's where I see things going. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of bullish on the future of behavioral science.
No, yeah, no, I get it. So are we. Uh, Personal question, or maybe, I'm sure you read a lot of books. What are some of it? And I see some wonderful, what do you call, the accolades or recommendation by some of the stalwarts on your book as well. But what are some of your two books, if you want to pick? Let's say, I think I just want to give number two books you want to pick and tell, like, these are the books must read according to you. Which ones are those?
Sure. Well, one of them would have to be Dr. Robert Cialdini's "Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion." That's kind of like I don't know, the Bible, if you will. That there's some wonderful, wonderful work in that. And Dr. Cialdini was kind enough to endorse my book,
Yeah,
Using
yeah.
Behavioral Science in Marketing. But I think, and he just reissued his book just this past year, the brand new edition, a lot more information, totally updated. So I think there's some really smart, useful advice in that book, and I think that's a great place to start. I love Roger Dooley's Brainfluence. I think he's got some really interesting studies there, and he talks about the study and how it might potentially apply to a marketer. And he gives us, as marketers or people who are doing marketing for that matter, interesting things to think about and different ideas to consider trying or testing, or just ways to think about applying some of the behavioral science. So those are, I think, two books that I've really enjoyed reading and have a tendency to return to and have gotten a lot of information from.
Awesome. My last question. Now, could be a bit sensitive. If I just want to ask you, while walking on road or the conferences, which brand do you think embraces, behavioral science principles or most? I mean, I know it could be the client-centric question. You can name a few, but which come to your mind, top of mind, who would you think is kind of best class study for, you know, usage of or discipline of behavioral science?
Sure. Well, I mean, I could certainly talk about my clients, but let's put those off to the side because obviously they're using it. But when I'm out there in the wild, just noticing
Yeah, yeah.
things, so one of them is Prudential Insurance. I think that
Okay.
they're doing a good job. I can remember being at the airport once and seeing a large banner of theirs, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. They're using behavioral science. And then the other one that I'm noticing is here in the U.S. at least, there's something called Publishers Clearinghouse. I
Okay.
think it's in other countries as well. But what they do is uh, they assign you a number, and then on a particular day they pull the winning prize number, and if it happens to be yours, you get $2,500 a month for for your life or something like that. And it's a way to make you aware of the magazines that they sell, although you don't need to buy a magazine in order to be part of um, the prize draw. But I've been getting their emails, and I'm noticing a lot of behavioral science in them. Just because I notice these things, right? It's an occupational hazard, I guess. But so that's two ends of the spectrum. One is trying to sell magazines, and the other is trying to sell insurance and financial planning. And I see both of them using these principles, and I just can't help but notice it, and I have to assume it's working for them.
Awesome. I think that's all. I mean, lovely chatting with you. And, while talking to you, like Nancy, I learned so much. And I'm sure the people who will listen to it will gain a great deal. Wish you all the best. And, any parting thoughts or any last thoughts you have based on what we have chatted? Anything comes to your mind?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Rajiv. It's been wonderful chatting with you. I was honored to be a guest on your show, and I love what you're doing. I love that you're spreading the word about behavioral science, and I would just say to your listeners, absolutely embrace it. Try it, test it. If it doesn't work at first, test it again, because my clients at least are seeing double and triple digit lifts in some cases over their benchmarks and controls. So if you're trying to influence behavior, this is absolutely something to look into. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, Nancy. Appreciate it.
You
Have a
too.
good. Bye.
Bye-bye.